Hello, everybody. This is Debbie Potts, and I must record this short, hopefully short podcast to talk about metabolism testing, metabolic health. I do Pinoy metabolic testing. It's a breath analysis, a breath and metabolism analysis. If you do a VO2 max test with somebody that you're wearing the face mask, measuring your oxygen in, exhaling carbon dioxide, the gas is being analyzed, it has some cable cords all connected to a computer. That is amazing. But the data you're getting back, you need to make sure they are creating the 5 or so, however they're doing it, training zones, your heart rate zones correctly. I just had an aha moment analyzing someone's data that was done across the country with someone else, and their zone 2, I realized, is not their zone 2. And then it dawned on me, their person that did the test for them created their 5 heart zones based on percentage of their VO2 max. You just did a metabolism test. We just had the whole analysis of looking at your fat, carbohydrate burn, your breathing frequency. We're collecting all this data. Why just waste that information on looking at your VO2 peak? Might not be the max, because a lot of people can't get to the max unless maybe they've done the test before and they know how to go deep and go to their highest level. So I want to share some information with you on metabolism testing. First, just to share a little bit about me. On my website, debbiepotts.net, learn from my experience. Life is not a race, it is a journey. I was a high performer, I'll just leave it here, that was competing in Ironman races. I started doing triathlons, gosh, when I was 25, I was 1995, I think, doing Danskin triathlons. I did my first Ironman distance triathlon 2001 and continue racing until I could no longer race in 2013, tried again 2015, and haven't raced since because I got, as FDN practitioners, we call it metabolic chaos. And now my focus is to help you that may be a high performer, maybe endurance athlete, maybe you're doing too much of everything. You thrive on more is better. And now you're doing a fitness test to get your zones, figure out how to get a program. But maybe you're just looking at what your VO2 max is, and not how can I fuel, train to perform my best today for whatever races, events you've got coming up. But what about your future self? How do you want to be showing up to life 5 years from now, 10 years, 20 years from now? Learn from my experience. More is not better. When I got my metabolic chaos or adrenal exhaustion, I was doing low carb. I was doing fasted workout with just bulletproof coffee. I was very metabolically efficient. I could train at high heart rates and still burn a lot of fat. And I was training for endurance, Ironmans, marathons, 50K trail runs. I was doing it all and thriving, kicking butt. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I appreciate it now. But at the time, I always thought I could do better and was always pushing to do more. But I was running a fitness studio. I was running my own business on top of training 20 hours a week. Why my mantra is less is more now. So if you want to avoid chronic fatigue, a burnout and breakdown, that is what I do with what I call the holistic method, to transform the whole you from the inside out to perform your best in life today and your future self. So metabolic chaos, we look at identifying your hidden sources of internal stress that are chronic stressors, and they accumulate with your external sources of chronic stress. We work on resolving those, but why I do what I do, because I saw 8, 9 different doctors, experts, and never really got better until I changed my whole life 4 years ago. And what I feel that is my purpose today, you can read in this blog and in my book on Amazon, which I'm going to review an updated copy, that not all stress is bad. We need stress, acute stress, to grow and adapt and thrive. And I believe that we can start to get stuck in our ways that we think we're going to get better by taking supplements. I always say, as you know, if you hear me talk a lot, not depending on supplements, that I can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits. I cannot out exercise for eating habits. I was doing exercise. I was doing low carb. I was in keto mode in that time 15 years ago. And I was doing fasted exercise. As we know, females, we don't do as well. And I probably created a hormone imbalance with those constant stressors. I was stressing my body. Note, I do not have children. I never could get pregnant. I was doing a little everything. So if you don't know my background, again, I can go through and read this in another recording, but you want to make sure you're doing all the right things in your training. And even if you're not training for a race, I would look back and wish I knew what I know now and really work on all the data we can collect these days. We have heart rate variability testing, we have nutritional therapy. There's a lot we can do. So if you want to thrive as you age and not go through what I went through, that's what I'm looking at. So I'm going to go back to this, but what is hormesis? What do we do as a FDN practitioner? What do I do as a nutritional therapy practitioner? And what do I do with Pinoy metabolism testing? So the point of this episode today is to look at, if you do metabolism test, we want to make sure we're getting the right data, because what we're looking at is a personalized fueling program, training program, and daily performance, how to be a health optimizer. I want you to get your right blood chemistry panel. And if you go to Alta Labs, Debbie Potts Coaching, so if you go to this link, you can get labs. They're always 20% off, so beware of the pop-up that comes on there. $243 for basic biomarkers. You can get all this stuff as APOB and little lipoprotein, LP, little a, all these different markers. Now, I like people to get this baseline biomarkers, but it doesn't include insulin. So I look at that. $3.98. Now, if that's too much for you, there's, remember, 20% coupon, but that's what the blood chemistry you want to look at, all these markers, T3 uptake, T4 uric acid, all that. So anyways, that's looking at all these markers. I want you to get CRP. We want to look at your ferritin. We want to look at your T3. We want to look at all this information plus insulin, APOB. We have to add those on. Okay, so go back and look at how I work as a practitioner. When we work together, I do all your intake forms. You get the labs delivered to you. You take the lab tests, your blood, your poop, your urine, whatever we decide is best for you. We want to look at 3 to 5 labs, get that all together. Now, when we do the metabolism testing, you can't do it remote. You got to find someone in person. So not everyone does it right. What I realized is when you are doing a test, your, what do you call it? Person doing the test, they're going to look at your final numbers. We want to look at this data, this raw data, your carbohydrates to fat. Okay, so when I go through someone's test, I have my cheat notes, zone 1. I'm going to look at zone 1, which is their recovery zone, and we'll get into that. This sheet here, my cheat sheet, and then we can look at how we look at their zones, find them. Okay, so when I'm over here, I'm looking at zone 1's the recovery zone. Find the adjusted fat max with the lowest amount of carbohydrates. It's a point of increased fat with the lowest carbs. It's top of zone 1 is your adjusted fat max, and then we take 10 to 15 beats below that. That will be there. So their peak fat max, it's here, 120, and then we'll do the bottom of zone 1 as their 10 to 15 beats. So then we know zone 2, that would be, and zone 1 is where we work on recovery, and the breathing frequencies we want to look at is about 18 to 22. So then I can look at their breathing frequencies on this example and look at their markers. So say I want to look at their breath frequencies, then I'm going to figure out where that is, and I can even change, not look at this, and then look at their RER and look at their heart rate, and then look at that data. So then I can see, okay, where their breathing frequencies is in purple. Their zone 1 is roughly 18 to 22 breathing frequencies, and I'm going to correlate that with the heart rate and the fat max. So not that you need to know all that, but that's what zone 1 is based on, not percentage of your VO2 max. I did a test. I don't use math. I'm using science. Really big difference in how we want to use this data to figure out your zone. So if your practitioner person doing your test is just looking at your training zones and they're figuring out these zones and the zone benefits by just looking at your max and going to a percentage of the max, that is not what you're doing a metabolism test for. So we want to look at the training zones a little bit differently. That's why we are doing a metabolism test. And you can read all about it in this article. I'll put in the links from Pinoy, how testing should change and enter training zones are going to be different purposes. So going back to our cheat notes, zone 2 is for long sustained distance. Doesn't mean slow. Remember, you want to get faster and faster and faster in this zone 2. That secret sauce to endurance athletes. And then as we age, we add in sprint interval training for women, if you're my age, and then men, you can do more time in zone 2 than we. Females don't need as much zone 2, but depends on this test result. If your zone 2 is really low, I'm going to have you work more here, and then we add in those sprints or zone 4 intervals. So it depends on your gender, your age, and what this test result says. All right, so zone 2, fat and carbohydrate crossover point. Where is your zone 2 to zone 3? That's where we switch in fuel. So remember, our 5 zones are based on your switching your fuel sources, and our breathing frequencies will help us identify that, the higher zones. So the bottom of your zone 2 is your adjusted fat max. That was the top of your zone 1. So now we're looking at where is that adjusted fat max we already found. That's your bottom of zone 2. Then top of zone 2 is a carbohydrate to fat crossover point. Where is the fat going down in this example? And where is that carbohydrate coming up higher? So that's around here. It's not one number, but it's in a range. So they're like 131 to 134, we start to see that shift. Okay, so that would be their zone 2. Okay, so now we have identified the bottom of zone 3 because we just said top of zone 2 is going to be your zone 2 to zone 3 switching of fuel. So now we know bottom of 3 is your crossover point, and then your top of 3, we're going to look at what your VT2 is minus 10 beats. So then we can go down to the bottom data and go, okay, the VT2 was at 164 heart rate minus 10 beats would be 154 heart rate. So now we've identified, based on their fuel source, metabolism, and their breathing analysis, what do we see for their heart rate in zone 3? This is when we're switching to more glycolysis. And we don't want to look at numbers alone. We want to look at 3 metrics together. So we're looking at breathing frequency. In response to the breathing frequency, you're going to see that change because you're trying to maintain pH balance. So if you looked at other blogs and other podcasts we've done on lactate threshold, it's more about lactate shuttling. And so our body, higher lactate levels, we're going to be working on breathing higher to maintain the pH balance. Right. So listen to Daniel Crumback on my podcast, and then Joe Friel. We talked about this as well. Breathing frequency in zone 3 is 26 to 32 breaths. So then we can look above, and then we can identify what would their breathing frequencies be in zone 3. Remember that's that RER was the carb to fat ratio point, and then heart rate is the red, and then breathing frequencies is purple. So we can kind of get a number. Where do we see 26 to 33? Their breathing frequencies kind of jump around. So we want to kind of get the average. And so that'd be zone 3, somewhere in there. So then we're looking at zone 4, and zone 4 is obviously the bottom of zone 4 is the VT2 minus 10 beats. And then the top of zone 4, we're going to look at VT2. Oops. Increase in acidosis in zone 4. So our fuel system's changing more to the phosphorylation, buffering, and then we'll see we get changes and increase in acidosis until zone 5 or exhaustion. We see speed and the pH changes in zone 4, and then breathing frequencies. We see the second drive increase in breaths is how it really can identify zone 4 is 30 to 40. So we track where zone 4 fuel sources will be changing. Zone 5 is 40 to 50 breaths. So we're using more lactate fuel, and then phosphorylation or that's the creatine. So we have increased rate of need for ATP to be created to keep up with intensity. So we have more acidosis byproducts, type of workout, medium intervals. This is our zone 4. And our fuel source is lactate phosphorylation. Our breathing frequencies is around 32 to 40. Okay, and then zone 5, the top of zone 5 is going to be your peak heart rate. Your peak VO2 max will help us. Where is your heart rate? So bottom of zone 5 is the start of the second drive of your breathing frequency. So where does that breathing frequency go up again? 40 plus breaths per minute. So the top of zone 5 is your peak VT1, your max heart rate. Breathing frequencies 40 plus breaths per minute, driving to about 50 breaths. And then Daniel said the chemoreceptor response increases CO2 production and changes in pH, initiates zone 5 and secondary major fuel system to use ATP PC, or also known as CRP. If max heart rate is not identified during the test, which a lot of people do not go to their max, can be close. I'll ask you what's your highest heart rate you've seen before, but sometimes the mask and everything gets to be hard to breathe in. So we don't truly get to your max, but we get close to it. We'll look at the RQ value as well as breathing frequencies and the oxygen to carbon dioxide. But we can look at what your reported max heart rate is in the past. So zone 5 is the mitochondria density improvements, improved coordination. If strength training for hill repeats and bike repeats using watts can help in here. But our fuel source zone 5 is ATP PC. Exercise type is the short intervals, so sprint intervals, and a breathing 40 to 45. So that's what we're looking at when we're finding your 5 zones, right? So we're looking at what heart rate they got to. Then we measure recovery for 2.5 minutes. But you'll see the RER exchange ratio is that fat to carb usage. So we're looking at your fuel source with the RER, respiratory exchange ratio, as we go. And then we stop the test when the person wants to stop, or they got 1.14 here as the highest. So we know we're good to get that data. We needed 173 is their highest heart rate. So that gives us some good clues of their fuel source being burned. Actually, a little bit of fat right there, but then we can see their fuel source during the different intensities, how they're still trying to use some fat here, and then the carbohydrate usage goes up. So when people are just telling you your 5 heart rate zones from only doing your VO2 max, make sure you're asking them, how did you create my zone 2? Because that's where I want you to train in. Do you need to know your sprint interval heart rate zone 5? You just want to go hard as you can. What I do think most people need to know is what is your zone 1? So when I'm doing sprint interval training, I'm going hard as I can. And then I'm going to come down to zone 1 to recover. So zone 1 is your warm up or active recovery or recovering from intense exercise, sprint, interval training, or your zone 4, zone 3, long, medium, short intervals. Zone 2, as I said, is that long sustained distance. Don't think it's slow, it's just long sustained distance. And that's where you're developing your mitochondria function. So we're improving our ability to create more ATP from using fat for fuel. So this is where we want to spend more time if you are training for a race that's long distance or a long distance event. If you're not, you should just do one of these once a week. I don't think we need to spend that 80% of zone 2 training unless you're training for a race, especially women. You'll hear we already have enough fast twitch or slow twitch muscle fibers. What we're lacking is fast twitch muscle fibers as we age. So we need more speed work and less zone 2. So this is if you are training for something specific. Zone 3 is more what we do for tempo pace, but it is suggested on these notes from Pinoy, strengthening your pulmonary muscles, improving your cardiovascular function. This is ideal intensity, working with your cardiologist to maybe get this monitored. But if you're suffering from lung or heart problem, because it's moderate intensity, it's a good stimulus for heart and lungs without being exhausted. But again, for sure, work with your doctor if you have any of those issues. Don't do this alone. And then zone 4 training helps you improve your VO2 max. You hear all about those 4x4 workouts. The VO2 max and your ability to sustain high intensity exercise for longer duration, you're improving lactate shuttling. So remember, lactic acid is old news. It's kind of a myth. It's been revised as lactate shuttling. So lactate is a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism, which can be used as fuel, recycled, and used for fuel by your muscles. As long as your body can clear these fatigue byproducts faster than being produced, the exercise intensity can remain sustainable. As a result, the greater your lactate shuttling capability, the greater your ability to sustain high exercise intensities for longer periods of times. So some people can stay in that zone for a little longer. Again, that'd be training adaptations. The more you do it, the better you are able to sustain that level. Okay, and then of course, zone 5 is our favorite sprint interval training, 10 to 30, 45 seconds max. It says 60 to 120 seconds, but I think that'd be more top of 4. So zone 2 is where or zone 5 is where you improve your VO2 max, peak power output, maximum speed, maximum cycle watts, so you're doing those sprints. So again, the benefits of training zone, you can see it on this picture. Remember, these 5 training zones ideally are established from this raw data, not determining your 5 zones with a scientific equation as percentage of your VO2 max. We just identified your metabolism, how well you're burning fat, how you're burning carbohydrates, where your breathing frequency goes up, so you're more switching your fuel sources at higher intensity. Okay, so we're looking at different markers in the tests. We get a report back, fat burn efficiency. We're getting a lot of information. So you can look at my many blogs I put from Pinoy into my website. But really, how we want to change our training zone should be changing over time. If you're training this way, your zone 2 should keep improving. So we give you a personalized program based on your test, and then we can identify your areas of opportunity and then figure out your workout program and nutrition, as well as metabolic health. If we can tie in your blood chemistry panel, as I was sharing earlier, with those baseline biomarkers, looking at your insulin, your CRP, your triglycerides, all these other numbers, as well as your thyroid, because that will have an impact on your metabolism. We're also, if you have a slower metabolism, we identify that in your resting test. And how do we improve metabolism? Strength training is a big part of that. And of course, eating protein. When we're looking at your exercise test, if we need to improve these heart rate zones and improve your numbers, we want to retest after 3 months and figure out, are you improving your ability to use more fat and carbohydrates? Are going to be different intensity levels should improve. So your heart rate and your speed should get faster at the same heart rate. After 3 months of endurance training, you have likely become more economical in your running. So you're now burning fewer calories at given pace. Perhaps you're more fat, higher percentage of fat that you're burning. So your fat metabolism, your energy process is going to improve. So remember, your heart rate zones correlate with your heart rate and metabolic response. So if your metabolism changes, so will its correlation to your heart rate profile. As a result, depending on how rapidly you progress through your fitness journey and training, you should assess your training zones every 3 months if you can. Every 6 months, every 3 months, if you're trying to really improve for performance. If you're more competitive, you might want to do every 4 to 8 weeks because you will see changes. And so your metabolism in those zones are going to change. Stop looking at the percentage of your VO2 max or lactate acid if you are doing a metabolism test as PNOE. So if you are doing this type of test, look at this data for your heart zones. If you're not able to get a test, then you can do 180 minus your age, max aerobic function heart rate's maffetone. You can do a VO2 max or lactic acid test if you'd like, if you can't get access to this. Lactic acid does not tell us where's my peak fat burning zone, where is my metabolic switching happening. So you need to know this information if that's what you're trying to do for your training and training in zone 2. You're using that lactic acid test measurement that Peter, Tia, and others talk about all the time. It's just guessing. It's another mathematical equation. Well, I guess you're testing, but that's more of an example of guessing what is your peak fat burning for your zone 2. It's not accurate because we're getting that raw data based on what you're doing. And it will change if you're doing it fasted, or I want you to eat what you normally eat before you work out and see how your fuel source is. And then, so remember to test the training zones and physiological adaptation. Each training zone elicits different physiological adaptations in the body, cellular fitness, your heart fitness, lung capacity, VO2 max, and more. So it's not just VO2 max we're testing. Each zone has a different benefits and means different. So how much time you will spend in each of those 5 zones depends on your areas of opportunity. Not everyone needs to do every workout per week in one of those zones, but often we can do, well, I've heard that's good to do a little bit, one workout per week in those zones, and then others, maybe we don't do zone 3, maybe we do tempo. So it depends on that person. That's why we want to say personalization, N equals 1, not one size fits all, one size will fail all. So we want to really personalize it. So spending time in zone 2, if you're looking to improve fat burning efficiency, if we tested you and your fat burning was not great, then we might have to do that. So it depends on you and what your test. We want to personalize that information. A lot of people are in zone 3 and they're not in zone 2 as they think. All right, so that's that blog. You can head to PNOE website to learn more too on the 5 zones and how we're testing them. That information is there as well. The age, gender, fitness level, every person has one or more systems that limits their health. So we're identifying what are your limitations? What is holding you back from being your best self as an athlete? Or maybe you're just a health optimizer. Maybe you're just trying to get leaner and stronger and faster, and you want to get the right data. We want to get the correct metabolic analysis to determine your true training zones, not doing a mathematical equation, looking at your training zones as a percentage of your max heart rate or a percentage of your VO2 max. That is not why we're doing this test. So if you want to know what your true zones are, make sure you're having someone analyze your test data correctly. So you can look at lots of information online. And I already went through that one. That's not what I want, but learn from my experience. Everything's on my website, multiple labs, and there's lots of free ebooks. So hopefully that helps clarify that you don't want to use math. You want to use science to figure out your zones. So let me know if you have questions. Head to my website, debbiepotts.net. There's all these free ebooks on here that you can get for free, and I don't do annoying emails. So you can head here and get all sorts of these free books that I wrote over the last 10 years. And don't worry, I won't share email, and I rarely send out newsletters because I find no one reads them anyways. So I stopped trying so hard newsletters. So that is all I have for today. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thanks for listening. Let me know if someone wants to hear more about this. Share it with them, and they'll do more on how to be more metabolically healthy as you age.